The fluorescent lights of the VFW hall buzzed overhead as Sarah Chun adjusted the sleeve of her crisp navy blazer, making sure the edge of her tattoo remained hidden. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her mirror at home, rehearsing the words that would make her sound authentic, believable, worthy of the respect she saw in the eyes of the veterans around her. The annual military appreciation dinner was in full swing, and she had managed to blend in perfectly among the crowd of service members, their families, and supporters. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup to her lips. 3 months ago, she had been nobody special, just another struggling single mother working double shifts at a downtown diner, invisible to most of the world. But tonight, she was Lieutenant Sarah Chun, former Navy SEAL, hero of classified missions she could never discuss in detail. The transformation had been gradual, starting with small lies that seemed harmless enough. The first time had been at her daughter Emma's school, during a career day presentation. Standing in front of 20 wide-eyed third graders, Sarah had intended to talk about her real job, about the dignity of honest work and serving others. But when she saw the other parents, doctors, lawyers, engineers, she felt that familiar sting of inadequacy. Before she knew it, words were spilling out about underwater demolition training, about serving her country in dangerous places she couldn't name. The children's faces lit up with admiration, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt important. That single lie had snowballed beyond her control. Soon she was wearing military surplus clothing to parent-teacher conferences, accepting thanks for her service at the grocery store, and finding herself invited to events like tonight. Each interaction made the deception deeper, more elaborate, more necessary to maintain. She had studied everything she could find online about SEAL training, memorized basic military terminology, and crafted a carefully vague backstory about classified operations. "Excuse me, Lieutenant Chun?" A voice behind her made Sarah's blood run cold. She turned to see a tall man in his 50s approaching, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian clothes. His eyes were sharp, assessing, and Sarah felt like prey being sized up by a predator. "I'm Commander Peterson, Navy Intelligence. I don't believe we've met." Sarah's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact and extend her hand. "Commander, good to meet you, sir." Her voice sounded steady to her own ears, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. This was exactly the scenario she had feared most, encountering someone with real military knowledge who might see through her deception. "I've been hearing interesting things about your service record," Peterson continued, his handshake firm and brief. "Underwater demolition, was it? That's quite impressive for someone so young. Mind if I ask which BUD/S class you were in?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to snap shut. Sarah had researched basic underwater demolition/SEAL training extensively, but she knew that any specific answer she gave could be easily verified or contradicted by someone with real knowledge. She had always relied on deflection and vague references to classified information, but Commander Peterson's direct approach left her with few options. "I'm sorry, Commander, but you know how it is with classified operations," Sarah replied, hoping her tone conveyed the right mix of regret and professionalism. "Even the training details are sensitive. I'm sure you understand." Peterson's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, skepticism, perhaps, or professional curiosity. "Of course, security is paramount, though I have to say, it's unusual to meet a female SEAL. The program only opened to women recently, and the first female candidate didn't complete training until 2021. When exactly did you serve?" Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was information she hadn't encountered in her research, details that exposed the fundamental impossibility of her claimed background. She could feel other veterans nearby beginning to listen to the conversation, drawn by some instinct that sensed drama unfolding. "I was part of a classified pilot program," she said desperately, grasping for any explanation that might preserve her cover. "Early integration, very hush-hush. You know how the Navy likes to test things quietly before going public." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, and she could see that Peterson wasn't buying it. His eyes had gone flat and cold, the look of a professional who had just confirmed his suspicions. Around them, the warm atmosphere of the VFW hall suddenly felt oppressive, charged with tension that made Sarah want to run. Interesting, Peterson said quietly. And that tattoo on your wrist, is that unit identification? Sarah's hand instinctively moved to cover the small, intricate design that peeked out from beneath her sleeve. The tattoo was real enough, a complex geometric pattern she had gotten during a particularly rebellious phase in college. She had never claimed it had military significance, but she had never corrected anyone who assumed it did either. It's personal, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Peterson nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he was filing away every detail of their conversation for later analysis. Of course. Well, Lieutenant, I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Perhaps we'll have a chance to talk more later. As he walked away, Sarah felt the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. She excused herself and hurried toward the restroom, her legs unsteady beneath her. In the mirror, she saw a stranger staring back, a woman whose entire identity had become a lie so complex she was losing track of what was real. The bathroom door opened behind her, and Sarah turned to see an older woman entering. She wore a simple dress, but her posture and the way she carried herself suggested military experience. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes held the particular sharpness that came from years of command responsibility. "Rough conversation out there?" the woman asked, moving to wash her hands at the sink beside Sarah's. "I am sorry." Sarah tried to sound confused, innocent. "Commander Peterson. He has a reputation for being thorough when something doesn't add up. I'm Admiral Martinez, retired. I've been watching you tonight, and I have to say, you're either the most nervous, genuine SEAL I've ever met, or you're in way over your head with something you shouldn't have started." Sarah's reflection in the mirror showed a woman caught between desperation and defeat. The smart thing would be to leave immediately, to disappear before this situation spiraled completely out of control. But something in Admiral Martinez's tone wasn't accusatory. It was almost understanding, as if she had seen this kind of desperation before. "I should go," Sarah whispered, gathering her purse with shaking hands. "You could," Admiral Martinez agreed, turning to face her fully. "Or you could tell me why someone clearly intelligent enough to research military protocols and brave enough to walk into a room full of veterans would risk everything to pretend to be something she's not." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow, stripping away the last of her pretense. For a moment, she considered maintaining the lie, but the weight of months of deception suddenly felt unbearable. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other in their urgency to be free. "I needed to matter," she said, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "My daughter needed to see me as someone worth looking up to. I worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, and I'm invisible to everyone. But when I said I was a SEAL, people listened. They respected me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was somebody important." Admiral Martinez studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Outside the bathroom, they could hear the dinner continuing, the sound of conversation and laughter that seemed to belong to a different world from the small, fluorescent-lit space where Sarah's lies were finally being exposed. "Sarah Chin," Admiral Martinez said slowly, and Sarah's heart stopped at the sound of her real name spoken with such certainty. 32 years old, divorced, daughter named Emma, works at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. Former foster child, no family support. Put herself through 2 years of community college before financial pressures forced her to drop out. Sarah stared at her in shock. "How old are you?" "Because 3 months ago, you submitted an application for military service. Full disclosure, financial hardship, single mother, looking for stability and education benefits for yourself and your daughter. The application was flagged for follow-up, but you never responded to our calls or letters." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All this time, while she had been lying about military service, the real military had been trying to contact her about actual opportunities. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that she had to grip the edge of the sink to keep from falling. "Your application showed real potential," Admiral Martinez continued. "High intelligence scores, strong motivation, clean background. You could have been something real, Sarah. You still can be. Before Sarah could respond, shouting erupted from the main hall. Through the bathroom door, they could hear Commander Peterson's voice raised in anger, other voices joining in, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. He's telling them, she whispered. He's exposing me. Admiral Martinez moved to the door, listening to the commotion outside. When she turned back to Sarah, her expression was grim but determined. It's about to get very ugly out there. Peterson's calling for security, talking about stolen valor charges. You have about 30 seconds before this becomes a legal matter instead of just a personal one. Sarah felt her knees give out, and she slumped against the bathroom wall. Everything she had built, every moment of respect and admiration she had experienced, was about to come crashing down in the most public and humiliating way possible. Worse, the legal implications could affect her custody of Emma, her employment, her entire future. I have to run, she said, pushing herself upright. I have to get out of here before what? Admiral Martinez stepped in front of the door, blocking Sarah's escape route. Before you face the consequences of your choices? Before you deal with the pain that made those choices seem reasonable? Running won't solve anything, Sarah. It will only make everything worse. The shouting outside grew louder, and Sarah could hear footsteps approaching the bathroom. In moments, her refuge would be invaded, and she would have to face the full consequences of her deception. The woman who had walked into the VFW hall that evening as Lieutenant Sarachan would leave as a fraud, a criminal, a cautionary tale about the dangers of stolen valor. But as Admiral Martinez stood between her and the door, Sarah saw something unexpected in the older woman's eyes. Not judgment, but a kind of fierce protectiveness that reminded her of her own feelings toward Emma. It was the look of someone who had seen good people make terrible mistakes and believed they deserved a chance at redemption. Trust me, Admiral Martinez said quietly, her hand moving to the door handle. What happens in the next few minutes will determine whether you become a victim of your desperation or the hero you pretended to be. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The door burst open, and Commander Peterson stormed in with 2 security guards and several other veterans behind him. His face was flushed with anger, and his finger pointed directly at Sarah like a weapon. There she is, he snarled. Saracen, stolen valor perpetrate. Gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. As the small bathroom filled with angry voices and accusing faces, Sarah realized that her moment of reckoning had arrived. The woman she had pretended to be would never have backed down from a fight, but the woman she really was felt like disappearing into the floor. Between those 2 versions of herself lay a truth she had never examined. That sometimes the greatest courage is required not for dramatic heroics, but for the simple act of admitting who you really are and asking for help to become something better. The confrontation in the bathroom doorway stretched like a frozen moment in time, with Commander Peterson's accusation hanging in the air between Sarah and the gathered veterans. She could see the disappointment and anger in their faces, the sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any legal consequence could. These were people who had genuinely sacrificed for their country, and she had mocked that sacrifice with her elaborate deception. Admiral Martinez stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention despite her civilian clothes and diminutive stature. The veterans fell silent, responding to decades of ingrained respect for authority and rank. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Gentlemen, I'll handle this situation personally. Security can stand down. Commander Peterson's jaw tightened, his anger barely contained. Admiral, with all due respect, this woman has committed a federal crime. She's been impersonating a naval officer, claiming service she never performed, accepting recognition she didn't earn. This isn't a matter for internal handling. Commander Peterson, Admiral Martinez's voice dropped to a tone that could have frozen steel. Are you questioning my assessment of this situation? The bathroom had become crowded with observers, veterans pressing forward to witness the drama, their faces a mixture of curiosity and righteous indignation. Sarah found herself pressed against the far wall, trapped between the sink and the gathering crowd, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "No, Admiral," Peterson replied stiffly, but his body language suggested barely restrained frustration. However, stolen valor is a serious crime that affects the integrity of military service. This woman has dishonored every real veteran in this room. Sarah wanted to speak, to defend herself or apologize or explain, but her voice seemed to have abandoned her entirely. She had imagined this moment of exposure many times, but never in her worst nightmares had she pictured it happening in front of so many people, with legal consequences hanging over her head like a sword. Admiral Martinez turned to face Sarah directly, her expression unreadable. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought she was about to be thrown to the wolves, delivered to Peterson and the others for whatever justice they deemed appropriate. Instead, the Admiral reached out and gently grasped Sarah's wrist, pushing back the sleeve to reveal the small geometric tattoo that had caught Peterson's attention earlier. "This tattoo," Admiral Martinez said, her voice carrying clearly through the cramped bathroom. "Tell me about it, Sarah." Sarah's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. She had gotten the tattoo during her sophomore year of college, an impulse decision during a particularly difficult period after aging out of the foster system. It was a geometric mandala design that a friend had drawn, meaningful only because it had been done during one of the darkest times of her life, when she needed something permanent and beautiful to remind her that she could survive anything. It's just a design," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Nothing special." Admiral Martinez studied the tattoo more closely, her fingers tracing the intricate lines with surprising gentleness. The room remained silent, everyone straining to understand what was happening, why this particular detail had captured the Admiral's attention so completely. "Sarah," Admiral Martinez said quietly, her voice taking on an almost maternal tone, "do you know what this symbol means? Do you understand what it represents?" Sarah shook her head, confusion replacing some of her terror. She had never researched the design beyond finding it aesthetically pleasing and personally meaningful. The artist who had created it for her had claimed it was his own original work, inspired by various geometric traditions, but not specifically representing any particular culture or organization. "This is a modified version of a very specific tactical designation," Admiral Martinez continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's used to identify members of a highly classified joint operations unit. The modifications are subtle. Most people would never recognize the significance, but the core structure is unmistakable." Commander Peterson moved closer, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. "Admiral, what are you suggesting? That this woman somehow accidentally got a classified military tattoo?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Commander. I am stating facts." Admiral Martinez released Sarah's wrist, but continued to study her face intently. "The unit that uses this designation has been operational for 12 years. Their existence is compartmentalized, known only to a very small number of people in the intelligence community. The fact that this symbol exists on Sarah's skin raises very serious questions." Sarah felt the floor of her reality shifting beneath her feet. Nothing the Admiral was saying made sense, yet the authority in her voice and the growing uncertainty on Peterson's face suggested that something significant was happening, something far beyond her understanding or control. "There must be some mistake," Peterson said, though his voice had lost its earlier certainty. "This woman is a fraud. She's been lying about military service for months." "Has she?" Admiral Martinez asked, turning back to the gathered crowd. "Or has she been telling a truth she didn't understand herself?" The suggestion hung in the air like an impossible puzzle. Sarah wanted to protest, to explain that the tattoo was meaningless, that she had never served in any military capacity, classified or otherwise. But the growing tension in the room and the strange certainty in Admiral Martinez's voice made her hesitate. "Admiral," one of the other veterans spoke up, an elderly man with Navy insignia on his jacket. "Are you saying this woman is some kind of undercover operative?" "I'm saying that classified operations sometimes involve people who are never officially acknowledged, never credited with service, never given the recognition they deserve for their sacrifices." Admiral Martinez's voice carried a weight of personal knowledge that made everyone in the room listen more carefully. People who are recruited from civilian life, trained for specific missions, and then return to civilian life with no official record of their service. Sarah's head was spinning. The Admiral was creating an elaborate fiction to protect her, but the story was so complex and delivered with such conviction that even she was beginning to question what was real. The faces around her showed varying degrees of confusion, skepticism, and dawning respect. But she applied for military service just 3 months ago, Peterson said weakly. She has no record of prior enlistment. Because her prior service never officially existed, Admiral Martinez replied smoothly. Commander, are you familiar with the concept of sheep-dip personnel? Individuals who are temporarily removed from official military records for sensitive operations, then return to civilian status with their service classified beyond normal security clearances? The term was apparently familiar to Peterson because his expression shifted again, this time toward uncomfortable recognition. Sarah could see him wrestling with contradictory information, trying to reconcile his certainty about her fraud with the Admiral's increasingly detailed explanation. Even if that were true, Peterson said slowly, she's been accepting praise and recognition for service she wasn't supposed to discuss. That would still be a violation of operational security. Admiral Martinez nodded gravely, which is exactly why I need to speak with her privately. This situation requires immediate damage control and a complete security review. If classified operations have been compromised, even inadvertently, there will be serious consequences for everyone involved. The threat was subtle but clear, and Sarah watched Peterson's resolve crumble as he realized he might have stumbled into something far more complex than simple stolen valor. The other veterans began to back away, sensing that they were witnessing something beyond their security clearance level. Of course, Admiral, Peterson said, his earlier aggression completely evaporated. I apologize for any misunderstanding. Should I file a security incident report? I'll handle all official reports personally, Admiral Martinez replied. For now, I need everyone to treat this conversation as classified. No discussion with anyone outside this room. No social media posts. No gossip. Is that understood? The gathered veterans nodded and began filing out of the bathroom, their expressions a mixture of confusion and chastened respect. Within minutes, Sarah found herself alone with Admiral Martinez, the silence heavy with unspoken questions and impossible implications. Admiral, Sarah began, her voice shaking, I don't understand what just happened. None of what you said is true. I've never served in any classified unit. This tattoo doesn't mean anything special. Admiral Martinez smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, her expression softening into something almost amused. I know, Sarah. Everything I just said was complete fiction, designed to protect you from very real legal consequences. The admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. You lie to protect me? But why? You don't even know me. Because 12 hours ago, I received a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about this situation, Admiral Martinez replied, moving to check that the bathroom door was securely closed. After Peterson started making inquiries about you this morning, word reached some very interesting people in the intelligence community. Sarah felt her knees going weak again. What do you mean? I mean that while you've been pretending to be a former SEAL, someone has been looking for you, Sarah Chun. Someone with enough clearance to make Admiral Martinez take their phone calls seriously, and enough authority to request that you be kept safe until they can make contact. The revelation was so unexpected, so impossible to process, that Sarah had to grip the sink again to remain upright. Everything about this evening had taken turns that defied logic or explanation, but this latest twist seemed to challenge the basic foundations of reality itself. "Oh," she whispered. "Who's looking for me?" Admiral Martinez checked her watch and moved toward the door. Someone who recognized that tattoo from a very different context than military operations. Someone who has been trying to locate you for reasons that have nothing to do with stolen valor and everything to do with your real family history. My family history? I aged out of foster care. I don't have any family. Sarah, Admiral Martinez said gently, her hand on the door handle. What do you know about your biological parents? about the circumstances that led to you entering the foster system as a child. The question opened wounds that Sarah had spent years learning to ignore. Her earliest memories were of institutional care, of being told that her parents were dead, and that no relatives existed to care for her. She had stopped asking questions about her origins during her teenage years, too focused on survival to waste energy on impossible dreams. "I know they're dead," she said quietly. "Car accident when I was 4. No relatives, no family connections. I've been alone since then." "The car accident part is true," Admiral Martinez said. "But the rest of your information is incomplete, deliberately obscured for reasons that are only now becoming clear. Your father wasn't just killed in that accident, Sarah. He was murdered, along with your mother, because of work he was doing for the government." Sarah's world tilted again. Every certainty she had clung to suddenly revealed as another layer of deception. But this time, the lies weren't hers. They were the careful constructions of people who had shaped her entire life without her knowledge. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Foster services would have told me if..." "Foster services told you what they were instructed to tell you by people with classified authority," Admiral Martinez interrupted. "Your parents were working on a sensitive project when they were killed. You were placed in protective custody disguised as standard foster care. Your identity carefully managed to keep you safe from the same people who killed them." The bathroom door opened, and a new figure stepped inside, a man in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from years of handling dangerous secrets. His eyes found Sarah immediately, studying her face with intense recognition. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "My name is Director Coleman, and I worked with your father 28 years ago. It's time you learn the truth about who you really are." The man who called himself Director Coleman studied Sarah with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance, comparing her face to some internal template he carried in his memory. His presence filled the small bathroom with an authority that made even Admiral Martinez seem diminished by comparison. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decades spent managing secrets that could reshape nations. "Your father's name was Dr. Marcus Chun," Coleman said, settling against the bathroom wall as if preparing for a long conversation. "Brilliant cryptographer, one of the finest minds the NSA ever recruited. Your mother, Elena, was a linguist with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Together, they were working on something called Project Nightingale when they were killed." Sarah's hands were shaking so violently that she had to clasp them together to maintain any semblance of composure. Every word Coleman spoke challenged the fundamental narrative of her life, replacing the simple tragedy of orphan childhood with a complex web of government secrets and hidden identities. "That tattoo on your wrist," Coleman continued, nodding toward the design that had started this entire chain of revelations, "isn't a military designation like Admiral Martinez suggested. It's something much more personal and much more dangerous." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's just a design my friend drew. Nothing special, nothing secret." Coleman reached into his jacket and withdrew a small tablet, activating the screen with practiced efficiency. The image that appeared made Sarah's blood run cold. It was her tattoo, exactly as it appeared on her wrist, but the photograph was clearly taken decades earlier and showed the same design carved into a piece of stone. "This photograph was taken in your parents' laboratory 3 days before they were murdered," Coleman said, rotating the tablet so Sarah could see it clearly. The symbol was their private code, a geometric cipher they developed to mark their most sensitive research. When they realized their work was being compromised and their lives were in danger, they embedded clues in places they hoped you would eventually discover. Sarah stared at the image, her mind struggling to process the implications. The tattoo she had gotten during a moment of college rebellion suddenly took on enormous significance, connecting her to parents she had never known and a history that had been deliberately hidden from her. "But how could I have known to get this exact design?" she asked, her voice rising with confusion and fear. "I've never seen this symbol before. My friend Danny drew it for me, based on some sacred geometry books he was studying." "Tell me about Danny," Coleman said, leaning forward intently. "Full name, background, how you met him." The request seemed innocent enough, but Something in Coleman's tone suggested that this detail was crucial to understanding the larger puzzle. Sarah tried to remember everything she could about the art student who had designed her tattoo, realizing for the first time how little she actually knew about him beyond their brief friendship. Danny Reeves, she said slowly. He was an art major at the community college when I was taking classes there. Always drawing these complex geometric patterns, really interested in mathematical relationships in art. He said he was working on his own artistic language, symbols that could convey meaning without words. Coleman and Admiral Martinez exchanged a look that was filled with significance Sarah couldn't decipher. When Coleman turned back to her, his expression had shifted from curiosity to something approaching excitement, as if pieces of a long unsolved puzzle were finally falling into place. Danny Reeves died in a car accident 6 months after you graduated, Coleman said quietly. Single vehicle collision on a rural highway. No witnesses, no explanation for why he was in that location. At the time, it was investigated as a random tragedy. Sarah felt the color drain from her face. Danny had been one of the few bright spots during her difficult college years, a gentle soul who had offered friendship without expecting anything in return. Learning of his death was shocking enough, but the implications Coleman was suggesting were terrifying. Are you saying he was murdered too? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that the people who killed your parents spent 28 years looking for the key to their encrypted research, Coleman replied. They've been monitoring you your entire life, waiting for you to lead them to whatever your parents hid. Danny Reeves was likely recruited or coerced into approaching you, tasked with getting close enough to plant specific symbols and see if any of them triggered recognition or memory. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her friendship with Danny, one of her few positive memories from that difficult period, had been nothing but manipulation. Even worse, his kindness and artistic talent had ultimately led to his death, making him another victim of secrets she had never known existed. The tattoo was a test, she realized, understanding flooding through her like ice water. They were trying to see if I would recognize the symbol if I had access to my parents' memories somehow. Exactly. And when you chose that specific design out of dozens Danny showed you, when you had it permanently marked on your skin, it confirmed what they had suspected, that your parents had somehow passed their secrets to you, probably through methods you wouldn't consciously recognize. Admiral Martinez moved closer, her expression grave. Sarah, what else do you remember from your early childhood? Any games your parents played with you? Songs they sang? Stories they told? Anything that seemed unusual or stuck with you over the years? Sarah tried to focus on memories from before the accident, but those years remained frustratingly vague, clouded by trauma and time. Most of her earliest recollections were fragments, impressions of warmth and safety, the sound of her mother's voice singing lullabies in a language she couldn't identify, her father drawing complex patterns while she played at his feet. My mother used to sing to me, she said slowly, the memory surfacing like something rising from deep water. Not in English, in some other language. I always assumed it was Chinese because of my father's heritage, but I tried to learn Mandarin as an adult, and the sounds were completely different. Coleman was typing rapidly on his tablet, recording every detail of her recollection. What about your father? Any specific games or activities you remember? He would draw these mazes, Sarah said, the memory becoming clearer as she spoke. Incredibly complex patterns that filled entire sheets of paper. He told me they were treasure maps, that if I could learn to see the hidden paths, I would find wonderful prizes. I thought it was just play, but he was so serious about it, so focused on making sure I understood the rules. The rules, Coleman repeated. What were the rules? Sarah closed her eyes, tried to recapture the feeling of being 4 years old, sitting beside her father while he drew his elaborate mazes. The memory was painful in its clarity, reminding her of security and love she had never experienced again after that terrible night when her world ended. Start from the center, not the edges, she recited, the words coming back to her with startling precision. The most obvious path is always wrong. When you find a dead end, look for the hidden door. And the most important rule, the treasure is never where you think it will be, but always where it needs to be. Coleman stopped typing and looked up at her with an expression of profound satisfaction. Sarah, Those weren't just games. Your father was teaching you how to decrypt his most sensitive codes. The geometric patterns, the maze-solving principles, the emphasis on counterintuitive thinking. It was all preparation for this moment. This moment, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the rapid succession of revelations, each one more impossible than the last. The moment when you would be old enough and smart enough to find what your parents hid for you, Admiral Martinez explained. They knew they were in danger, but they also knew their work was too important to be lost. So they created a backup plan, a way to preserve their research through the one person they trusted completely, their daughter. Coleman activated another screen on his tablet, revealing what appeared to be a satellite photograph of a remote location surrounded by forest. 3 weeks ago, our analysts finally cracked a pattern in your parents' research notes. Hidden in their mathematical formulas and linguistic databases was a set of coordinates, a location they visited repeatedly during the months before their death. Sarah studied the image, seeing nothing but trees and a small clearing that looked like thousands of other patches of wilderness across the country. "What's there?" "We don't know," Coleman admitted. "The location is heavily shielded from conventional surveillance, and any attempt to investigate directly would likely trigger security measures your parents put in place. But based on their notes, we believe they constructed a dead drop, a hidden cache containing the complete research they died protecting." "And you think I can find it?" Sarah asked, incredulity creeping into her voice. "I was 4 years old when they died. I don't remember anything about hidden caches or secret locations." "Your conscious mind doesn't remember," Admiral Martinez corrected. "But your parents spent years preparing you for this possibility. The maze games, the symbol recognition, the pattern training, it was all designed to give you the tools you would need to access their legacy when the time came." Coleman leaned forward, his expression intense with urgency. "Sarah, the people who killed your parents are still active, still dangerous. They've spent nearly 3 decades trying to find what your parents hid, and they're getting close. 6 months ago, they eliminated Danny Reeves when they realized he had served his purpose. 2 weeks ago, they made contact with someone in the foster system who had access to your original placement records." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to fear she already knew the answer. "It means they know who you are now," Coleman said grimly. "They know where you live, where you work, where your daughter goes to school. The only thing keeping you safe is that they still need you to find your parents' research. But once they have that information, you and Emma will become liabilities that need to be eliminated." The mention of her daughter's name sent a spike of pure terror through Sarah's chest. Everything else, the false identity she had created, the legal consequences of stolen valor, even the revelation about her parents, seemed insignificant compared to the threat against Emma's safety. "We have to protect her," Sarah said, her voice fierce with maternal desperation. "Whatever these people want, whatever my parents hid, it's not worth risking my daughter's life. The only way to protect Emma is to find your parents' research before the people who killed them do," Admiral Martinez said gently. "If they get access to Project Nightingale, the consequences will extend far beyond your family. Your parents died trying to prevent something catastrophic, and their sacrifice will be meaningless unless we finish what they started." Coleman stood and moved toward the door, pausing to look back at Sarah with an expression that mixed sympathy with implacable determination. "You have a choice to make, Sarah. You can continue running from a truth you never asked for, hoping these people will somehow lose interest and leave you alone. Or you can embrace the legacy your parents left you and use it to protect not just your daughter, but countless other innocent people." "And if I can't find whatever they hid?" Sarah asked. "If I'm not as prepared as you think I am, then we'll all have to face the consequences of Project Nightingale falling into the wrong hands," Coleman replied. "But based on everything I've observed tonight, I believe your parents chose their successor well. The question is whether you're ready to stop pretending to be someone else's hero and start being the one your parents trained you to become." As Coleman opened the door to leave, Sarah caught a glimpse of the VFW hall beyond, where the dinner was winding down and veterans were beginning to filter toward the exits. In a few hours, this place would be empty, and she would have to make a decision that would determine the course of her life and the safety of everyone she loved. The woman who had entered this bathroom as a fraud was being asked to leave as something she had never imagined possible. The inheritor of a legacy that could save or damn the world, depending on choices she was only beginning to understand. The drive to the coordinates Coleman had shown her took Sarah through increasingly remote countryside, the highway giving way to smaller roads that seemed to disappear into the Virginia wilderness. Emma sat beside her in the passenger seat, her 13-year-old mind struggling to process the impossible story her mother had finally revealed the night before. The decision to bring her daughter had been agonizing, but leaving her behind would have meant trusting her safety to people Sarah barely knew, and that was a risk she couldn't accept. "Mom," Emma said quietly, her voice cutting through the tense silence that had settled over them since leaving the safe house Coleman's people had provided. "Are you scared?" Sarah glanced at her daughter through the rearview mirror, seeing her own features reflected in Emma's face, but also traces of the grandparents she had never known. The question deserved an honest answer, even if the truth was more terrifying than any lie she had ever told. "Terrified," Sarah admitted, slowing the rental car as they approached the turnoff Coleman had marked on his map. "But sometimes being scared is the only sensible response to an impossible situation." Emma nodded with the peculiar wisdom that children develop when forced to grow up too quickly. Over the past 24 hours, she had learned that her entire family history was a fabrication, that her mother was being hunted by people who had killed her grandparents, and that their survival depended on finding secrets hidden in the wilderness by cryptographers she would never meet. "Will you recognize it when we find it?" Emma asked, studying the dense forest that pressed close to both sides of the narrow road. "Whatever grandfather and grandmother hid out here?" "Honestly don't know," Sarah replied, pulling over at a small clearing that matched the satellite imagery Coleman had shown her. "Your grandfather taught me to solve mazes when I was younger than you are now, but I was so little that most of the lessons feel like half-remembered dreams." They sat in the parked car for several minutes, both of them staring into the woods that surrounded them. According to Coleman's research, Dr. Marcus Chun and Elena Chun had visited this location repeatedly during the final months of their lives, always under cover of weekend camping trips with their young daughter. Somewhere in these acres of forest, they had constructed a cache that contained the complete research for Project Nightingale. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Admiral Martinez, who was coordinating security from a command post they had established 20 miles away. The message was brief, but ominous. "Hostile surveillance detected moving toward your location. Estimate 30 minutes before contact. Recommend immediate search initiation." "We need to move," Sarah said, pocketing the phone and gathering the supplies Coleman's team had provided. "The people who killed your grandparents have found us." Emma shouldered her own backpack without complaint, though Sarah could see the fear in her eyes despite her determined expression. They had practiced this moment during the long drive, rehearsing what they would do if the enemy arrived before they found what they were looking for. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Find the cache, retrieve whatever Dr. Chun had hidden, and escape through the wilderness to a secondary extraction point. The forest was deeper and more primordial than Sarah had expected, with towering trees that blocked most of the afternoon sunlight and created a cathedral-like atmosphere of ancient silence. She followed the GPS coordinates Coleman had provided, but as they moved deeper into the woods, she began to feel something beyond mere navigation pulling her forward. "Mom," Emma said, stopping suddenly beside a massive oak tree whose trunk was easily 12 feet in diameter. "Look at this." Sarah approached the tree and saw what had caught her daughter's attention. Carved into the bark at eye level was a small geometric pattern, weathered by decades of growth, but still clearly recognizable. It was similar to the design of her tattoo, but simpler, more primitive, like an early version of the same symbolic language. "He marked the trail," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her as she recognized her father's handiwork. "He left breadcrumbs for me to follow." They found the next marker 100 yards deeper into the forest, then another beyond that, each symbol slightly more complex than the last. As they followed the trail, Sarah began to feel memories stirring that she had thought were lost forever. She remembered walking this same path as a 4-year-old, her small hand clasped in her father's larger one, listening to him explain the importance of remembering the way through the wilderness. The treasure is never where you think it will be, Sarah murmured, reciting one of the maze rules her father had taught her, but always where it needs to be. What does that mean? Emma asked, studying the latest marker they had discovered carved into a granite boulder. I think it means we're not looking for something hidden in the ground, Sarah realized, the pieces of her father's logic finally clicking into place. We're looking for something hidden in plain sight, something that would be overlooked by people who didn't know how to see the pattern. The sound of distant engines cut through the forest stillness, confirming that their pursuers had arrived at the clearing where they had left the car. Sarah estimated they had perhaps 15 minutes before the enemy team found their trail and began following them into the woods. Everything depended on whether her father's lessons had prepared her adequately for this moment. The final marker led them to a small clearing dominated by a circle of standing stones that looked natural but arranged with mathematical precision. In the center of the circle sat a flat granite slab that could have been a primitive altar or simply a convenient resting place for hikers. Sarah approached it cautiously, running her hands over the smooth surface while searching for any sign of her father's work. "It's just a rock," Emma said, disappointment clear in her voice. "There's nothing here." Sarah knelt beside the slab and closed her eyes, trying to remember everything her father had taught her about finding hidden doors in his elaborate mazes. The most obvious answer was usually wrong. He told her, when you found a dead end, you looked for the secret passage. And the treasure was always where it needed to be, not where you expected to find it. "Start from the center, not the edges," she whispered, placing her hands on the exact middle of the stone slab. Almost immediately, she felt something that made her pulse quicken. The stone was slightly warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been in the cool forest air. Sarah pressed down on the center of the slab with both hands and felt it give slightly under the pressure. There was a soft clicking sound, like the tumblers of a lock falling into place, and then the entire surface of the stone began to slide sideways with surprising smoothness. Beneath it was revealed a small chamber carved directly into the bedrock, lined with metal to protect its contents from moisture and time. "Oh my God," Emma breathed, staring into the hidden compartment that their grandparents had prepared for this moment. Inside the chamber was a waterproof container about the size of a briefcase, along with several smaller sealed packages and what appeared to be a handwritten letter addressed simply to Sarah. She lifted out the letter with trembling hands, recognizing the elegant handwriting that matched samples Coleman had shown her from her parents' research notes. "My dearest daughter," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and your mother and I are gone. But we have not left you unprepared for the burden we must now place on your young shoulders. Everything you need to complete our work is contained in this cache, but more importantly, everything you need to understand why that work matters is already within you." Sarah's hands shook as she continued reading her father's words, written in the certain knowledge that he would not survive to deliver them personally. The letter explained the true nature of Project Nightingale, a cryptographic breakthrough that could either revolutionize global communication security or, in the wrong hands, give hostile nations the ability to break any encryption system in the world. "The research is incomplete by design," the letter continued. "The final algorithms exist only in my memory, encoded using the pattern recognition systems I taught you through our maze games. The people who wish to steal our work believe they can find it through conventional means, but they are wrong. The key to completing Project Nightingale lies not in any document or computer file, but in the trained intuition of someone who learned to see patterns the way you did." The sound of voices calling out in the distance made both Sarah and Emma freeze. Their pursuers had found the trail and were moving through the forest with methodical efficiency, closing the distance between them with each passing moment. Sarah quickly gathered all the materials from the cache, sealing them in her backpack, while Emma kept watch for approaching threats. The letter contained detailed instructions for reaching the secondary extraction point, but it also included something far more valuable, the final piece of her father's training that would allow her to complete his work. "The pattern you seek is not in the documents her father had written. It is in the sequence of choices you made to reach this place. Every marker you followed, every decision you trusted, every moment when you chose intuition over logic, That sequence, properly decoded, contains the mathematical key to completing Project Nightingale. Sarah stared at the letter in amazement, understanding finally dawning on her. Her father hadn't just hidden his research in the wilderness. He had turned the very act of finding it into the final element of his encryption system. The path she had followed through the forest, guided by childhood memories and pattern recognition he had spent years teaching her, was itself the key to unlocking the most sensitive aspects of his work. "We need to go," Emma urged, pointing toward the sound of approaching footsteps. "They're getting closer." Sarah sealed the letter in her jacket and helped Emma climb out of the clearing, but as they prepared to flee deeper into the forest, she realized that running was no longer their only option. For the first time since this ordeal began, she possessed something that gave her leverage: the complete research of Project Nightingale, secured in a way that only she could access. The people who had killed her parents and Danny Reeves, who had spent decades hunting for these secrets, were about to discover that their quarry had become the hunter. Sarah Chun had spent her entire adult life pretending to be someone she wasn't, but now she was ready to become exactly who her parents had trained her to be. As armed figures appeared at the edge of the clearing behind them, Sarah took her daughter's hand and led her toward the extraction point, carrying with her the power to change the balance of global security. The woman who had been hauled in for pretending to be a SEAL was about to become something far more dangerous: a cryptographer's daughter with her father's secrets and her mother's determination to see justice done. The real battle was just beginning, and for the first time in her life, Sarah was fighting with weapons she had been trained from birth to wield. 6 months after the confrontation in the Virginia wilderness, Sarah Chun stood before a joint session of the Senate Intelligence Committee, her testimony classified at levels that required senators to surrender their personal devices and submit to security screening before entering the chamber. The woman who had once pretended to be a Navy SEAL now carried credentials that granted her access to some of the most sensitive facilities in the United States government. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. After escaping through the forest with Emma and the Project Nightingale materials, Sarah had spent weeks working with Coleman's team to decode her father's research using the pattern recognition skills he had taught her as a child. The process had been mentally exhausting, requiring her to access memories and intuitive processes she barely understood, but the results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Project Nightingale, when fully implemented, had indeed proven to be the cryptographic breakthrough her parents had died protecting. But Sarah had insisted on modifications to her father's original design, safeguards that would prevent the technology from being weaponized against innocent civilians. The final system could enhance legitimate government communications while remaining useless to terrorists or hostile intelligence services. Dr. Chun, Senator Williams addressed her using the title she had earned through an accelerated doctoral program in applied mathematics. "Can you confirm for the record that the Nightingale system is now operational and secure?" "Yes, Senator," Sarah replied, consulting the classified briefing materials spread before her. "All primary installations are active, and we've successfully tested the system against every known cryptographic attack method. More importantly, the built-in ethical constraints are functioning as designed. The technology cannot be used to violate the privacy rights of American citizens without proper judicial oversight." Senator Martinez leaned forward with interest. "And the hostile actors who pursued this technology for nearly 3 decades?" "Neutralized," Sarah said simply, the single word carrying the weight of months of dangerous intelligence operations that had finally brought her parents' killers to justice. The network that had murdered Dr. Marcus Chun and Elena Chun had been systematically dismantled, their agents arrested or eliminated by joint CIA task forces operating under Sarah's strategic guidance. After the committee session concluded, Sarah walked through the corridors of the Hart Senate office building toward the exit, her security detail maintaining a discreet but constant presence. The threats against her family had been eliminated, but her new role as the government's leading expert on advanced cryptography meant that protection remained a permanent necessity. Emma was waiting for her outside the building, now 14, and somehow managing to balance the normal challenges of teenage life with the extraordinary circumstances of being raised by a mother whose work could reshape global communications. She had adapted to their new reality with remarkable resilience, Though Sarah knew the dramatic changes in their lives had affected her in ways they were still discovering. "How did it go?" Emma asked as they climbed into the armored sedan that would take them back to their new home in Northern Virginia. "Good," Sarah replied, settling back in the leather seat with relief. "The senators seem satisfied that we've solved the security issues without creating new ones. And the international agreements are finally coming together." Over the past months, Sarah had worked with allies around the world to establish protocols for sharing Nightingale technology while maintaining strict controls over its application. The system would eventually revolutionize everything from banking security to diplomatic communications, but only under carefully negotiated frameworks that prevented its misuse. "Admiral Martinez called while you were testifying," Emma said, checking her secure phone. "She wants to know if you're still planning to attend the ceremony tomorrow." Sarah smiled, thinking about the event that would mark the end of one chapter in her life and the beginning of another. The VFW Hall, where her deception had first been exposed, was hosting a special recognition ceremony, honoring veterans whose service had been classified or unacknowledged for reasons of national security. Sarah would be among those recognized, not for the lies she had told, but for the very real sacrifices she had made to complete her parents' work. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman who had been accused of stolen valor would now receive legitimate military honors for classified service that couldn't be fully described in public. Director Coleman had arranged for her to be granted retroactive military status in recognition of her contributions to national security, making her deception from months earlier seem almost prophetic. "I'll be there," Sarah told her daughter. "It feels important to close that circle, to face the people I lied to, and show them who I really became." That evening, Sarah sat in her home office reviewing the final technical specifications for the next phase of Nightingale deployment. The work was intellectually demanding in ways that reminded her constantly of her father's brilliance. But it was also deeply satisfying to know that she was using her inherited abilities to protect rather than deceive. A soft knock on her door interrupted her concentration, and Emma entered carrying 2 cups of tea in the Chinese porcelain service that had been recovered from her grandparents' belongings. The ritual of evening tea had become one of their ways of maintaining connection despite the dramatically changed circumstances of their lives. "I've been thinking about something," Emma said, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "About the tattoo that started everything." Sarah unconsciously touched her wrist, where the geometric pattern remained as a permanent reminder of the journey that had brought them to this point. She had considered having it removed or modified, but ultimately decided that it represented something important about the power of hidden connections and unexpected meanings. "What about it?" Sarah asked, accepting the tea with gratitude for her daughter's thoughtfulness. "Do you think grandfather somehow knew you would choose that exact design? That you would recognize it even though you couldn't remember where you'd seen it before?" The question touched on something Sarah had wondered about many times during their ordeal. Her father's maze lessons had included concepts about pattern recognition that operated below the level of conscious awareness, teaching her to trust intuitive responses she couldn't always explain logically. "I think he planted seeds," Sarah said finally. "Not specific memories, but ways of thinking that would lead me toward the right choices when the time came." The tattoo, following the trail through the forest, trusting Admiral Martinez when she created that story to protect me. All of those decisions came from somewhere deeper than rational analysis. Emma nodded thoughtfully, sipping her tea while contemplating the mystery of inherited knowledge and unconscious preparation. At 14, she was already showing signs of the same pattern recognition abilities that had been passed down through the Chun family line, though Sarah was determined to give her daughter choices about how to use those gifts. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "do you ever regret lying about being a SEAL? I mean, before we knew about any of this other stuff?" Sarah considered the question carefully, thinking about the desperate woman who had walked into that VFW hall, seeking respect and recognition through borrowed valor. That woman seemed like a stranger now, but Sarah could still remember the pain and inadequacy that had driven her to such desperate measures. "I regret the deception," she said finally, "but I don't regret the journey it led us on. If I hadn't been exposed that night, if Commander Peterson hadn't called me out and Admiral Martinez hadn't intervened, we might never have learned the truth about our family. Your grandparents would still be mysteries, their killers would still be free, and Project Nightingale might have fallen into the wrong hands. So, you think everything happened for a reason? I think everything happened because people made choices, Sarah corrected gently. Some good choices, some bad ones, some desperate ones that turn out better than they had any right to. But the important thing is that we kept making choices, even when we didn't understand what they meant. The next morning, Sarah stood once again in the VFW hall, where her deception had been exposed 6 months earlier. But this time, she wore the dress blue uniform of a naval intelligence officer, her rank and decorations genuine, even if most of her actual service remained classified beyond public acknowledgement. Commander Peterson approached her before the ceremony began, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and professional respect. "Dr. Chun," he said formally, "I owe you an apology for my assumptions that night. I was so focused on protecting the integrity of military service that I failed to consider alternative explanations for what I was observing." "Commander," Sarah replied, extending her hand, "you were absolutely right to challenge my claims that night. I was lying about my service, and you were doing your job by exposing that deception. The fact that the truth turned out to be more complicated than either of us realized doesn't change the fact that you acted with integrity." Peterson shook her hand with obvious relief, clearly having worried about this confrontation for months. Around them, the hall was filling with veterans and their families, many of the same faces that had witnessed Sarah's humiliation now gathered to celebrate her genuine achievements. Admiral Martinez took the podium to begin the ceremony, her voice carrying clearly through the crowded space. "Today we recognize individuals whose service to our nation has been conducted in shadow, whose sacrifices have gone unacknowledged for reasons of operational security. Their courage has protected not just American lives, but the fundamental principles that define who we are as a people." As Sarah listened to the citations being read for various recipients, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The woman who had pretended to be a SEAL had discovered that she was something far more important, the inheritor of a legacy that had shaped the course of history, and the protector of secrets that could determine the future of global security. When her name was called, Sarah walked to the front of the hall where Admiral Martinez waited with the Navy Cross, one of the service's highest decorations. The citation spoke in carefully general terms about extraordinary service in the development and protection of critical intelligence capabilities, but everyone in the room understood that the specifics would remain classified indefinitely. "Dr. Sarah Chun," Admiral Martinez announced as she pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform, "for exceptional courage in the face of personal danger, for intellectual brilliance applied in service of national security, and for completing a mission that began before her birth and will protect American interests for generations to come." The applause that filled the hall was different from the polite recognition Sarah had received during her months of deception. This time, she had earned every gesture of respect, every expression of gratitude, every moment of acknowledgement from people who understood the true cost of service to something greater than oneself. As she returned to her seat beside Emma, Sarah caught sight of herself in the reflection of the hall's windows. The image showed a woman in military uniform surrounded by family and colleagues, finally occupying the role she had once only pretended to fill. The tattoo on her wrist remained hidden beneath her sleeve, but she no longer needed external symbols to define her identity. Sarah Chun had learned the difference between pretending to be a hero and actually becoming one. The journey had cost her years of deception and placed her family in mortal danger, but it had also revealed that sometimes the most extraordinary destinies are disguised as ordinary lives, waiting for the right moment to emerge from shadows into light. The woman who had been hauled in for pretending to be a SEAL had become something her parents would have been proud of, not an imitation of someone else's courage, but an original expression of her own inherited strength, finally applied in service of truth rather than deception. And that truth, painful as it had been to discover, had proven powerful enough to reshape the world.